Transition. This is a time of transition, isn't it? The fall. Fall season. All sorts of transitions happening. Take a second. What's on your heart right now? What kind of transitions are you worried about? What are a few things out there that you're trusting God for? Maybe when you think about them, I think we all have them. When you think about them, your heart just goes, ooh. You're like, oh, how's this going to turn out? Man, God, what's going to happen? On the radar this fall. Maybe you sent your kid off to college like me. Maybe a lot further than I sent my kid. Maybe off to California. Maybe you're in a job transition right now. Maybe some of you are brand new here. Welcome if you are. And you're moving into town. This is the time of year. A lot of families start coming. Transitions. Kids going to the next grade. Paperwork to figure out. Maybe you're moving. Maybe something going on at your job. What makes your heart tense up? Do you know what it is? You got yours. What's in your head? We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that this morning as we're coming to the fall. We're ending the Something Only God Can Do series, which we've been doing for the last 6 weeks or so. And if you've been tracking with us, the idea of this Something Only God Can Do series is how can we put things into God's hands that are meant for Him to be in charge of? How can we release control to Him? We talked about providence a number of weeks ago. Providence, that's a big churchy word. But just the fact that Jesus, a God, is sovereignly in control over all the different areas, moving your life around because He has a wonderful plan for your life. We're trusting Him to orchestrate life. We're trusting Him for miracles. Sometimes God will even show up and do a miracle that's outside the realm of nature, and we're trusting Him for things of that sort. That going outside of physics and science, this isn't going to happen. That's a miracle. We talked about prayer. Pastor Lee talked about how sometimes when we pray, God can give us different answers. Sometimes it's yes, sometimes it's no, sometimes it's wait. But knowing that God, this is stuff we're putting into His hands to release control. We talked about trusting God with our sins a few weeks ago. On a spiritual sense, trusting God, releasing control. Trusting God with our kids was last week, the next generation. That's a big one. Labor Day weekend, we're going to be talking about trusting God at work. And in a few minutes, I'm going to bring up some good friends from our church to tell a story that I think is going to be very encouraging to you as they've trusted God at work and navigating the tensions. This is what I want us to think about. As we're ending this Something Only God Can Do series, and you're picturing that thing in your head that's causing you tension right now, that you're concerned about. If we are really believing God, if we're really releasing control to God, this should affect our days. This should affect our hearts. If you're releasing control into God's hands for Him to do only what He can do, you should have peace. Peace is available. You could have peace over that area. You could have a calm assurance as you walk into it. Confidence, calm assurance. You could experience satisfaction, the abundant life. This week, in this fall season, with every area transition, if we're taking to heart that there are things out there that we have to release control to God as things that only He can do, our lives should change. Our hearts should change if we're really believing these things. We want to walk away. I want to encourage us all to walk away this week, in this season, to trust in God with those areas, that there's something different. A lot of you this summer, maybe went on plane trips. Think about it this way. Jump on a plane. You're entrusting your life to the pilot. Something only he can do is fly that plane. Maybe there's a few of you. I said that to a friend of mine. He's like, oh, I actually have my pilot's license. I'm like, it doesn't apply to you. Most of us, that doesn't apply to. Where you can't get behind that pilot's steering wheel and take control of the plane. But if we're really trusting him, you'll get on that plane with a calm peace and assurance that he'll get you from point A to point B. We all know those people. Maybe you are one of those people that get on and they grab the seat and they hyperventilate and they need to take drugs to calm down. It doesn't change the ride. Trusting in the pilot will breed calm assurance that you'll get there. That's what we want to have with Jesus this fall. That's what I want for every one of us, to have calm assurance with those areas that your heart gets tense over. We're going to take a look at a story from Scripture that's very appropriate for Labor Day. We're going to take a look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You guys remember those guys, right? From the Old Testament. Friends of Daniel. It's going to be in Daniel 3 that we're taking a look at. But let me just get our brains going a little bit and refresh you with the story. So the Jewish people of the Old Testament, they were overrun by the Babylonians, brought into slavery and captivity. And if you remember, Daniel, who's the main character of this book, and his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were taken into slavery. They were brought under the king Nebuchadnezzar. Slavery. But you know what happened? They ended up succeeding. By following Yahweh and the rules and the work ethic and everything that goes into that, they ended up becoming very successful in Babylon. They endured a lot of the culture. They went through Babylonian education. They were given Babylonian names. They worked hard. They succeeded. They raised up through the ranks. And then a moment happened where Nebuchadnezzar made this statue. Do you remember this? The king made this statue. It's a 90-foot tall statue, 9 feet wide, this huge statue. And he said to the men, he said to everybody, bow down to this statue. If you don't bow down to the statue, you're going to die. And everyone starts bowing down to the statue to worship. Not Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, no, we won't bow down. There's a lot that we're going to learn from this. I want us to take a look at how they responded to the king, to their boss. Okay, picture this being your boss, and picture you saying this to the boss. Daniel 3:16 through 18 says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. Can you imagine saying that to your boss? I don't even need to tell you, boss. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. How in the world did they have that kind of confidence? They had this calm assurance that this tension, this spot, that this issue that was in their life, a life or death issue, they had this peace and confidence to step into it and just say, God will take control. God is in control. Whether he answers us or not, whether he saves us or not, I can have peace. Because God is a good God and he knows what's best. I would love to have that confidence and that peace this fall with my issues. We're going to take a look at this tension as it relates to Labor Day, because we're going to get a hint as we look at this story of really how they're able to do it. What we're going to see here, let's take a look at another passage here. This was the moment of tension in 3:14. It says, Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? This is what they did well at work. I want you to think about work specifically. Most of us have vocational jobs. Many of the people in our church here, their job is at home, either with their kids and they're working at home virtually. We have people from all different backgrounds, all different work. We have executives. We have people who are plumbers. We have stay-at-home moms. We have all sorts of people in our congregation, which I think is wonderful. What can we learn from this situation with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? They were able to navigate the tension of where loyalty turned into worship. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were loyal servants. They were hard workers. They had a great work ethic. But at some point, there was a line that was drawn in the sand where it said, you need to worship this other God. So, friends, loyalty and a hard work ethic, let's talk about that for a second, that side of the pendulum. These guys knew how to work hard. They knew that Yahweh was telling them to be hard workers. That idea right there as a Christian is something that we ought to succeed in tremendously. We should be listening to God and say, God is telling us to be hard workers. Many of you are very hard workers. God designed work. In Genesis, God gave us work to do. We know in Revelation that the kingdom and our work is going to go on for eternity, and the things that you're doing right now are vitally significant. The work, going to work Monday through Friday. Loyalty to our bosses is not the issue here that Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego are facing. They are loyal. They're hard workers. They're successful. And that's something I want to esteem to all of you. I want to affirm you. Continue to be hard workers, especially what's going on in our culture right now, right? It's the quiet resignation. We're seeing after the pandemic and people are working from home, we're just seeing that people are beginning to not work as hard. We're seeing people are trying to get second jobs on the side and have side hustles and not put it in full weeks. I want to encourage us as Christians, no, we ought to be hard workers. We ought to be returning our emails, meaning taking on responsibility, showing the world that that Christ is a hard worker and Jesus is telling us to be hard workers. That's not a problem. Go be hard workers. And I imagine most of you are very hard workers. The issue arose when it went from loyalty to worship. This is the big tension I want you to think about on Labor Day weekend, this fall. How do you know when your job goes from you just being a good, hard, loyal worker to it turning into something that's not healthy? Or it turns into an issue of worship? Where these three men were being told by the king, he didn't even acknowledge that they were good, solid, hard workers. He wanted them to worship. He wanted them to turn it from loyalty into worship. And they said, no, this is something we're going to trust God with no matter what happens. We're going to trust God. So that's one reason. The question is, how do we know when loyalty turns into worship? How do we know? Is there an equation? I don't think so. I think as you're thinking about your jobs and the tension at your jobs, it's something between you and the Lord. But what I want to do is I want to invite some friends up here. I want to invite Brandon and Heather Steiger up here on the stage with us, and we're going to interview. We're going to let them tell us their story as an example and a testimony of how they knew that this tension was going from loyalty to worship and what they did about it and how God showed up in their lives. Because I want it to be an encouragement to all of you as you're stepping on the plane of the fall and you're trusting that God's going to get you from point A to point B. I want you to hear a story from some friends of mine in terms of how they've trusted God and they could have calm assurance stepping out and doing something radical because they knew they were stepping over the line from loyalty to worship. Can you guys clap for Brandon and Heather? I love these guys. Thank you so much, Brandon and Heather. Brandon and Heather love long walks on the beach. And no, that's not true. They do love F1, though, and they had me over for dinner the other day, and you guys made pizza, and you love pickleball. Yes. That's a few things, just to like warm up the crowd a little bit here in terms of, but you guys, some fans of pickleball or F1, one of those two. We're sure who's going to win F1 this season. Not that I really know. Verstappen's going to win. There's a little tension. We'll talk about that later. So thank you guys so much. It started with a phone call that Brandon and I had. And Brandon was telling me how he was choosing to make a big transition at his job. And the job that you guys did together. Actually, let's start off, Heather. Why don't you tell us a little bit, just a backstory, get us up to speed. What are we talking about? Give them some context of what this conversation is all about.
So Brandon and I guess about 5 years into our marriage, had decided to leave corporate America and start our own marketing agency. At the time, it was just really web dev. That was our mainstay, and eventually evolved into other areas of marketing, and to the point that about, I guess, almost 2 years ago, we began the process of merging our agency with another agency down in DC area. So in that transitionary year of bringing these two agencies together, we initially had started out with the mindset, of course, transitions take time, it's going to be a lot of extra, we're all in, everybody's excited, enthusiastic. But about a year and a few months into it, Brandon and I really were struck with how stressful and how altering this had started to become to our personal life, our family life, our God-given priorities, and we were just struggling with our loyalty to our agency and the people in it versus all the things that we know God has called us to in a larger context of our life priorities. So, having prayed through it and processed this for some time, he and I made the very difficult decision to leave the agency as partners of the larger group of partners, and not really knowing where our regular income was going to come from. We just knew we had to do it. God just was saying, leave, go, I will take care of you. And we'll get to how that worked out.
It's pretty radical. And many of you are sitting here right now saying, man, I want to leave my job right now too. That's not what we're getting at necessarily. This was between you guys and the Lord, where you knew there was this tension that you're faced with being loyal to your work, but not letting it turn into worship, that it turned into something that just became an idol in your life and took over everything in your lives. And so you guys did make a radical decision. We were talking over pizza, Brandon and I, and we were saying how a lot of times it seems like women might be a little bit more open to talking about these things, and guys don't necessarily always talk about this tension of how to balance work and family and church and all those different things. So we had a pretty interesting question. Tell us a little bit from your perspective.
Yeah, we did. It's really fascinating because I know being in the business place and working with other just people, right? One of the challenges is like as guys, we sit there and we wrestle. I think we wrestle with it, but I don't think we talk about it. And it's been really fascinating, kind of this journey that since we left in April, the number of people that have been put into our lives. I was in DC back in July with this event with just entrepreneurs from around the United States and around the world. And this guy in this little small breakout session of about 100 people got up behind the mic, said something, and I was just really like wowed by it. So later that night, he just happened to be standing right beside me. And so I was like, hey, like that was really meaningful. I'm glad you said that. Because he talked about the tension that he felt as an executive. He was in the finance place. So we started talking, and he's like, well, where are you from? I said, well, I'm in Downingtown, Pennsylvania. He goes, oh, I'm in Downingtown too. He goes, no way. He goes, where do you live? And I said, well, I live on the backside of Marsh Creek Lake. He goes, oh, so do I. He goes, where do your kids go to school? I said, well, my kids go to Downingtown Middle School and STEM. He goes, oh, my kids go to Windsor Christian. I said, no way. I said, where do you go to church? He goes, I go to Calvary Chapel.
That would have been awesome.
But it was really fascinating. He goes, so we're sitting there talking, and one of his biggest strengths, he goes, the challenge that I face, he goes, here I am as an executive. I'm told to lead and grow my company, be a powerful, dynamic, visionary leader, lead my family, be there for my kids, be there for my wife. And he goes, it's challenging because I sit there every day and I'm sitting in this position told to make these types of decisions, to put the business first, to go to these dinners, to hobnob, do all this stuff. And he goes, at the end of the day, I'm challenged because how do I be a godly Christian man, model this to my wife, to my kids, to my business leaders, and all balance all this? And he goes, the tension is just unreal. And when it came to our decision to leave, it was nothing that others did. It was what we were doing. It's like we get caught up and it's like, doing all the work, and all of a sudden, one night it's working really late. The next night it's, doing it again. And all of a sudden it's like, one of the kids will ask you to like look at something. You're like, hold on, let me finish this up first. Or all of a sudden it's like missing a wrestling practice. And, and it's like for us, because we worked together, and if you can imagine it for almost 20 years, we would literally all of a sudden, every conversation at night was work, stress. And it all came boiling out, even to the point where for us, I started seeing it personally that my kids would they'd get mad with us and they would say, stop talking about work. And then it got to a point where they'd just leave the room. And all of a sudden it's like we'd work our day, and then all of a sudden we'd come to night, and we continued to work. And even though we're married, and you're supposed to have that different relationship with your wife, I even started crossing that line where, well, no, she's just a business coworker, and it impacted our relationship with our kids. And when we got to this point, and I tried to fix it, I was asking others to help me fix it, and nobody could. It was me. I made these decisions. As they say, it's like hindsight's always 20/20, right? So you look behind and you're like, wow, where have I come from? So it was just like these small changes that just grew immensely over time. And so
that's a big deal. I think everyone's sitting here, if you're listening, you probably could resonate with this. You said something interesting that the guy from the other Calvary had said to you, but he said, I feel like I'm always failing.
Yeah.
When it comes to this tension between being a good hard worker and getting my job done, but not letting it get out of place. And we talked a lot about the values, the many different values that you have to juggle constantly and keeping those values in order.
Yeah.
And so,
It was really interesting. So my resignation letter literally went like this, because I identified it, and it was stressful to me. And I got to a point where even sleeping at night, it was nightmares. Like everything is just out of whack. And so in my resignation letter, I literally just said, this is not you. This was me. I made these decisions. I made these choices in my life, but I have to fix them. And the only way to fix them is to be radical. And I listed my priorities, and I said, this is the priorities that I need in my life. I said, 1, it's my faith with my God. Number 2, it's my relationship with my wife. Number 3, it's my relationship with both my kids. 4, it's my community and how do I give back in my community. And then 5, it's now my job. And it was interesting because that was a scary moment to basically say right in front of all these people, it's my faith first. I'm now outed, right?
Yeah.
And then when we announced it to the entire company, and we're talking now, 100-some people between freelancers and contractors and employees, we said the same thing. We said, it's because of our faith. My faith comes first. My wife is next, my kids, my community, and then my job. And it's fascinating, as we were leaving the company, the amount of other believers who came out of the woodworks.
Yeah.
We had no clue. But it was just they were like, we resonate with that.
Thank you so much. Because it is, from the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you get this picture of them being told clearly, bow down to this idol. It's usually not that clear in this world, is it? No. It's much more like gray area, something where you need to rely on talking to God about it and saying, how is it, where do I need to trust God at work? Put these things into his hands as lines that I won't step over. That's where it's getting back to the something only God can do, that you guys just said, no, this is a line. This tension we have to give over to God because this isn't right. We're going, Heather, I'd love to hear a little bit of your story about it. I know we chatted a little bit about it, and even just that, on the loyalty, hard work side, people want to win. There's something as owning your company or being an executive, you want to win, but there's that tension. How did you experience that tension?
So, Brandon and I are both a little competitive. And I think part of us just being very driven and ambitious and hardworking. It's always come from a place of having, been raised with very strong work ethics of, you don't, bail on the job halfway finished. You don't, and faith-based, Christian-based beliefs of that work ethic. But I think I saw, the tension of wanting to achieve, wanting to be part of marketing agencies can be a very alluring type of work environment, right? You can have very sexy clients, and it can make you think oh, we can get that name, we can get that brand. You can get caught up in the fast-pacedness of it because it has an addictive sort of adrenaline rush of go harder, go more. You can keep getting more and more and achieving more. So some of that's already baked into the industry that we were working at the time. But also for me, I saw the loyalty to the people as one of my biggest struggles because, from one of my roles was to do a lot of the hiring. So, I'd hired half of the people that we had, we doubled in size after the coming together of our two agencies. So I felt so guilty with abandoning them in a way, and it was a choice between my godly family, be it, us, our children, our community, and my work family. And struggling and wrestling through that was a huge tension for me.
Yeah, that gets into, let's put up this other slide here, Daniel 3:21 through 23, just to see this story as how the king gets upset, which many people do get upset out in the world, as Christians make decisions about where loyalty, we're not going to step over this line, into worship, turning things into idols. The king gets upset, and he says, heat that furnace up twice as hot, so hot that these guards die. You guys know the story if you grew up around church at all. They get thrown in there, and then but the big idea here is I want us to talk about, I want to hear you guys. I want to hear the emotional level of giving this to God, but what it's like standing at the furnace. And so as you guys think about these tensions in your lives that I referred to back at the beginning, as you're standing there and having to make hard decisions, there's going to be a lot of emotions that go along with that as well. So tell us a little bit. Brandon, I think it's your turn.
Yeah. Man, standing at the furnace, I'll say we're still in that furnace. We're still doing it. And it's really fascinating because when we started this process, if you kind of backtrack in history, back to January, we started feeling like, hey, something's not right. February, we're like, hey, this isn't right. We've got to make a decision. We've got to make a change. And we announced this in March. So right at the middle of February, when we had made the decision, like, we need to leave, we were saying we're going to trust God for income because you imagine, like, we both worked in the same company. It was like we're cutting 2 incomes out. And that was scary, but we're like, okay, we'll give it to God. But in the back of my mind, we were also saying, well, our stocks have done really well. I mean, it had grown by thousands of percents. But then what happens is, then Putin invades Ukraine, stock market decides it's going to tank, and I know tech stocks, so guess what? Tech's took a royal nosedive. And I went from having 1,000% growth to 1% growth. And all of a sudden it was like, ooh, now we can't rely on stocks anymore. That's not going to be our payday. And so it was really scary. And we're like, okay, we're going to do this. And it was fascinating. We told the kids, my youngest says, great, Dad, let me help you find a job. So she was like Googling. She's like, okay, you work at Home Depot. You can be a gardener. I'm like, yeah, we're going with those. My son's response was, are we going to have to sell the house? So you can see that. And I said, no, we're not. Like, we're trusting God that this is going to happen. But along the way, through being in the furnace, God has put people in our path and things and stories. And I remember during March Madness, I saw a friend I have not seen, 3 or 4 years. And we were talking. He's another executive, and he has a business that's well over $100 million in revenue. And we were sitting there talking, and I was just, hey, he was living over here in Applecross. I said, are you still in Applecross? He's like, well, no. And I said, what's going on? He goes, well, nobody really knows, but he goes, my wife and I have chosen to get a divorce. He goes, I made the wrong decision. I said, what do you mean? He goes, during the pandemic, I focused on saving the business and not my family. And he goes, it's the worst decision. He's a non-believer. And he goes, it's the worst decision I've ever made. He goes, my kids hate me. My wife hates me. I've ruined it. I've ruined everything. And I'd give it all up right now. And we shared about that. But then even fast forwarding to like this week, school started. And I'm seeing these different stories happen in our lives. And Heather's now started documenting like where God is moving. And, and basically as we're in this furnace time right now. And my daughter on Monday morning, I said, hey, are you excited about going back to school? She's going to be an 8th grader. And she goes, yeah, I really am. And she's like going a mile a minute. And last year she had a really, really rough year. And I asked her, I said, why are you so excited? And she's like, well, I got saved in the spring and was baptized. And she goes, I've really just believed God's going to make it a better year. So she's in this for her own little furnace.
She's learning from you guys.
Yeah, and she's just like, every day now I'm in my Bible. She goes, I'm journaling to God every day. And I said, yeah, I get it. I said, I've been in my Bible every day, and it's been great to see God keeps putting stories, and I'm fortunate for this group here because you guys get to listen every Sunday, but it's really meant for me.
No, it's not. It's me.
It's been great. I love it, every sermon. But then, I go back, and every time I'm in this, whereas we're in the furnace, I will say where I thought it might be a couple of months. And there are days where the furnace sucks. It's hot. and because we are having to rely on God every single day. And we probably already have 10 pages of stories of how God is taking care of us, even to the point where last month I was like, okay, let me take out some stocks, even though the stocks are whatever. And so I take out some money for stocks to pay our monthly bills. And I'm like, Heather, a week later, I'm like, you won't believe what happened. All the money we took out, the stock market rallied, and in 2 weeks, made it all back for the money I took out. So I'm at a net neutral. So it's just been, God's just been there a long way.
What I love about this whole thing is as we're thinking about those areas, very practically in trusting God, we'll see what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were in this together. We're in this together. You guys are in this together as a family. I wanted you guys to hear a level of encouragement that, yes, trust God. He will show up in miraculous ways. I want you to give one little plug, too, for how Women's Bible Study made a big impact, because as you're in the furnace, you told me, I got to capture my thoughts as I'm standing there. So tell us a little bit about what happened.
Yeah, so as we're dealing, at the edge of the furnace, we haven't stepped in yet, the anxiety is becoming overwhelming. And, sometimes when you got to do something, but you haven't done it yet, that's the worst place to be in. You're like, is it worse to step in the furnace or to be out here thinking about doing it? So I was in that place of like, and having doubts and like, how is this going to work out, God? And like, I know you say that you'll work it out, but, what if you don't? Those are real doubts that we have. And I think it's fair to say that, it's important to be honest about those things. Like, don't pretend just because we know we're not supposed to be anxious or fearful, all the things the Bible say, does not mean that we don't necessarily struggle with those things. And there's a difference between knowing that and knowing that in your heart. So, but I felt convicted one day when I was doing my devotion or my study homework for the Armor of God study, where at some point I was just struck with the challenge to put on that armor of faith, and it almost hit me in the reverse that we're always challenged to like, don't have anxiety, trust in me, don't have all these things. But I thought about it in the reverse, because something that Priscilla Shriver, who did the study, said, it was like, if you are not in agreement with the Lord on the truth, then therefore you're in agreement with the devil. And I was like, whoa. I mean, I'm in cahoots with the devil when I doubt and have fear. That was like chilling. And I was like, I never want to be in agreement with the devil, right? So for me, that was so convicting that it was not just about me having faith in the Lord, but that by not having faith in the Lord, I was doing the exact opposite. I was having faith in the devil, and I cannot be part of that, right? So for me, taking that step of, nope, I'm not going to go there, was part of being disciplined and obedient to the Lord's, ask of us. But in turn, I felt the presence of that fourth person in the fire as we've been through this journey in the furnace.
You're giving it away, the end. The fourth person.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'll save it. Go ahead.
Awesome, guys. That was so good. And kind of the end of the story is, now that you're looking back into getting into the workforce, you're just being more thoughtful about your values, making sure you're keeping God and family first before going after it. So thank you guys so much. Can you guys clap for them as they get off the stage? Thank you so much. Let's end with this thought as the worship team's coming back up here. Take a look at how it does end. This is the encouragement. Daniel 3:24 through 25. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished. This is after they made it through. He declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." He answered and said, "But I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the fourth is like a son of the gods." This likely was Jesus in the flames, pre-incarnate Christ. We're not sure exactly. Many commentators think it is. This is what I want you guys to think about, especially as you think about their story and applying, trusting God this coming fall with whatever that thing is, whatever that thing that makes your heart tense this next season. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, for one, knew the stories of old of how God showed up. Tell each other your stories. But it's in these tense moments where you're in the furnace that you get to be with the fourth man. When you're trusting God for these things that mean everything to you, and you're putting those in his hands, perhaps in a more real way than the rest of your week, you're going to see Jesus showing up in your life. You're going to see Jesus showing up and giving you that peace that surpasses understanding, that will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. From this whole Something Only God Can Do series, what I'd like you to remember is trust God. You'll get to see Jesus, and you'll get to experience peace. That's what I'm going to pray for us all for this coming fall. I pray that we'd be witnesses as you guys go out into the workforce. As you're the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednegos in the entire culture around us. Trust Jesus. Don't be in cahoots with the devil. Trust Jesus. Trust him for his truth. Put your faith and put your heart in his hands.